Jaco back with you, the Big 550 KTRS. Good morning, it's 11:17. I've told this story before. A few years ago, I was visiting some friends who'd moved into an older home in Maplewood, and they were, pulling out lathing. And back in the day, people would pack old newspapers in the walls. Good place to store them, insulation, who knows. Pulling it out, it was the full-page op-ed section, I think called the Outlook section, of the Post-Dispatch from May, I believe, of 1947. And it was several pages dedicated to the proposition that unless St. Louis City and County merged into one unified government, that the region was doomed. 1947. And not a good deal has happened since then. Now, again, people have talked about nibbling around the edges. For example, unifying school districts. Maybe two adjacent suburbs would talk about merging their police and fire departments. St. Louis City talks about rejoining St. Louis County, not as a unitary government, but just becoming another city in the county so the city wouldn't have to pay for the assessor and other normal county services. That could all be taken care of in Clayton. But what about the big idea? And it's one of the ideas that will be talked about tonight at this town hall meeting called St. Louis 2010, broadcast from 6 to 7 p.m. On both Fox 2 and KPLR 11, anchored by our very own John Brown. Is this an idea whose time has come, or is it just so off the wall that it would never work here? One of the things that strikes me among those who say, well, it could never work here, and I know a lot of it just has to do with St. Louis's attitudes, is that when you see cities like Nashville and Indianapolis and Columbus and others who've done this kind of unitary government thing, it doesn't seem the roof is caved in. But there are a lot of fears around here it might. Terry Jones is professor of political science over at UMSL, author, among other books, of Fragmented by Design, Why St. Louis Has So Many Governments, and he joins us for a few moments this morning. Terry, good morning. Thanks for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
All right. People have been talking about not the merger of the city and the county, but a possible pie-in-the-sky unitary government for the longest time. We've seen other municipalities and counties merge into unitary governments, and things have motored along quite well, thank you very much. What is the problem here, besides the fact we've got 91 municipalities, which I discovered in my research the other day, is more than twice as many municipalities as in the entire state of Rhode Island?
And indeed, we have over 250 municipalities in the greater St. Louis region. The 91, of course, is just
St. Louis County. Yeah.
First of all, we like it that way. If you ask people what they find especially appealing about the St. Louis metropolitan area, an answer you get very often is it has cosmopolitan amenities and a small-town feel. Well, the way you get a small-town feel is to have a lot of small towns.
When you were working on your book, Fragmented by Design, Why St. Louis Has So Many Governments, this is not something that just happened accidentally. This was done purposefully, people setting up all these small towns, right?
The city of St. Louis purposely removed itself from St. Louis County in 1876 and to establish itself not only as a separate city but also as a separate county. There have been recurring efforts to revisit the issue in the 1920s, the late 1950s, early 1960s, and as recently in a serious fashion in the late 1980s, but they've not come to any kind of complete or even near merger. On the other hand, we have formed a lot of special districts, so we have done a considerable amount of things together, that is to say, that cross county boundaries, things like the Metropolitan Sewer District, the St. Louis Community College District, the Zoo Museum District. So there has been a growing regionalism, but it's not come through a merger or consolidation.
Okay, given that because of the attitudes of folks here in St. Louis, this is very likely never to happen, just for a moment, sit back and let's put on our best practices cap and think about it. If this were to happen, if St. Louis were to pull a Nashville or an Indy or a Columbus, just in terms of political science, of efficiency, of political clout, of economics, would it make a difference? Would it conceivably make things better or worse, and if so, how?
It would not make as much of a difference as those that propose it claim. And if you look at an Indianapolis and after its merger with Marion County or a Nashville with Davidson County, it helped them in a couple of situations for attracting an NFL franchise, for example. But it was not a game maker and something that was dramatic in nature.
Why was that? Because you hear all these people who are pushing this saying that it indeed would be.
You're still going to have race as an issue. You're still going to have educational challenges. There are a whole host of things that are not going to be solved by tinkering with the structure of government.
Now, how much of this fragmentation was due to people liking the small-town feel of keeping government closer to the bone, and how much of it was an attempt to keep their particular enclave racially pure?
The race certainly has been a feature of public policy in this region since its earliest days, and some of it was certainly racially motivated. But a lot of it is simply, again, the desire to have things close, whether it be having one alderperson for every 15,000 people in the city of St. Louis so that he or she probably lives just down the street, or whether it's having a lot of municipalities in 5, 10, 15,000 population.
Are you aware of any other cities in the surrounding county that have a similar type of thing that St. Louis City and County have, where you've got just an absolute ton of small municipalities?
No, the only other jurisdiction that bears some resemblance is Baltimore, where the city of Baltimore is separate from Baltimore County. But Baltimore County has very few municipalities.
Again, when this was set up here, there were three things at work. One, the city of St. Louis exited stage left in 1876 from St. Louis County. Okay.
Right.
Number two, you had a number of small towns, whether they were Clayton or Kirkwood or Florissant, that were there, and the urban sprawl sort of grew out to meet them. They were previously existing towns.
And that really started in right after the World's Fair.
And then you have all the proliferation of suburbs that were founded from 1940 going forward. What was the impetus behind that last cohort of burbs that were set up?
To get control of the zoning power so that you can make sure that your municipality had people just like you. That might be just like you in terms of socioeconomic status. It might be just like you in terms of taste. Wildwood in the 1990s, when it incorporated, had very much of an environmental focus. Or it could, as you've already indicated, be race. Just like you, the same color.
Yeah, so as somebody who spent the better part of his career studying this, at the end of the day, these decisions that were made in the 19th and the 20th centuries, how are they impacting us now in terms of the city being, or the region being a global economic player, in terms of moving things forward economically, in terms of best practices governmentally? You say a unitary government really, at the end of the day, wouldn't make that much difference. So how is this extreme fracturing worked out from your point of view?
It's encouraged the region to do things through other devices. Special districts is one of them, but you mentioned economic development. Our economic development effort is a mixed public-private partnership. RCGA is at the center of the communications, but other entities within each of the jurisdictions, like the St. Louis Development Corporation in the city or the St. Louis County Economic Council, are also players at the table. So we do a lot of collaboration and coordination as opposed to having one entity on top ordering around everybody else.
Well, if it is not if it's not political fragmentation that is leading us in many ways to sort of wring our hands and wonder why many people feel we're an also-ran in the global economy of the 21st century. If this is not the issue, if this works pretty much as well as anything else, what is the issue?
Race and educational attainment would be by far the two top issues on the list.
Okay, let's break those down. Race, how does that retard our moving forward into the 21st century and becoming a global trading powerhouse? After all, the St. Louis metropolitan area has roughly the same gross domestic product as the entire nation of New Zealand. That's not an inconsequential amount of money and prowess, and yet we seem to be getting left in the dust by other metro regions. How does race play into that specifically?
We are not an attractive place for African Americans, young African Americans. I'm talking about those in their 20s and 30s, to be or to stay if they grew up here. We're not providing the kind of opportunities and diversity that they treasure, and so we were losing all too many of that group to places like Dallas and Atlanta.